ways, and really want to honour and acknowledge Helene, Tan, Akina, the crew that have made this possible, and yeah, just lots of gratitude for your mahi, so thank you. By way of brief introduction, so Tui and myself both work for an organisation called Emerge Institute, and we won't get too much into kind of our stories, but in essence, both of us have sort of straddled the worlds of business and impact and philanthropy in different ways. Myself personally spent a bunch of time in the corporate consulting scene, sort of with the view that business can be a force for good, and found that very challenging when we started coming up against the realities of greenwashing and big business and capitalism, and found it's not as easy as my idealistic naive self wanted to as a graduate going into that, and then found sort of social entrepreneurship as this sort of place with this vision of doing business better, and spent some time in India working with small enterprises there, running an accelerator here, went off and studied in Oxford, kind of unpacking these questions of systems change and business more. And I think through all of this time, the more one dug into where the problems are and where they come from, the more awareness came that so much of our approach is putting the problems out there and the solutions out there, and we seem to have distanced and separated ourselves from that. And our own work, our self-awareness, our personal work, our spiritual work seems so core, has become an awareness, is so core to how we effectively create the change we wish to. So that's sort of a little bit of my background and what draws me to this sort of mahi, which we'll dive into more deeply. I'll hand it over to Tui if you want to share a bit about yourself as well.
Kia ora, thanks, Shruthi. Yeah, ko toi tuka ingoa. I'm based here in Tamaki Makaurau, and lovely to be with you all. Similarly, my journey started in sort of the entrepreneurship space and facilitating different incubators and accelerators, and found social impact, and really got into that world, and how business could be used as a force for good. And I traveled a lot around the States and in Asia to see what was being done out there, and I found that no matter where I went, there was something missing for me, and I started to get involved in sort of more the leadership development space, and sort of saw the need for the two to kind of come together around our own personal transformation and systems change and innovation and entrepreneurship, and kind of have dabbled quite a bit in philanthropy and non-profits, working in them, facilitating, contracting, and have started quite a few different projects and initiatives in the social impact space. So yeah, lovely to be with you here today, and back to you, Shruthi.
Yeah, awesome. And do feel free to share more about yourself in the chat box. Kia ora, Cherish, and others that have started sharing in there. Would love to get a sense of who's in the room and what brings you here. As Tan mentioned earlier, we're going to have a couple of breakouts, and the hope is really to create a safe and brave space where we can really honestly voice some of the things we've noticed about ourselves, our organizations, about the system, and hope that seeing these things and shedding light on them can help us all really bring us close to achieving the change we wish to through our various avenues. And so really encourage you all to share safely and bravely. The breakouts will be a space for that. In the main space, if in order to, this is recorded, but feel free to sort of anonymize the organization that you represent, or just to speak in more neutral terms if that helps you kind of share in a way that feels safer, but really encourage that for all of our collective learning. Thanks everyone for participating in that. If you're feeling up for it, we'd love for you just to share a couple of words in the chat box, and definitely take note and on a piece of paper if you have, and if you feel comfortable sharing just a couple of words on how you're arriving. And we'll come back to this a bit later on in the session as well. So awesome. So how the flow of the session is going to be is we're going to share a little bit of sort of content and provocation up front, Tui and I, on sort of, some of the thinking of what we mean by the need to dismantle and decolonize our way of thinking and being in the world of social entrepreneurship and social innovation. So we'll kind of share a little bit, then we're going to jump into two breakouts to then kind of apply that theory to our own lives, to our own experience, and see how that shows up, resonates or doesn't resonate for us. Then we'll come back, we'll have a little bit of time for questions at the end and wrap up with sort of closing comments and takeaway. So that's the flow. And as Tan said, yeah, feel free to share your questions at any point, and look forward to learning together. So if we think about many of the social and environmental problems that our world faces today, all of you, I'm sure, are working on these directly or indirectly in many different ways. And we begin to question sort of why these problems exist and where they come from. And if we ask, why a few times, which we often do in our organization, sooner or later we hit this sort of issue or this point of capitalism in our economic system. Why is there so much pollution in waterways? Yeah, well, there's lots of runoff from farms. Why is that the case? It's cheaper to let it run off than do agriculture in a more sustainable way. There's pressure on farmers and others in that system to produce profitably, to maintain their livelihoods. There's mental health pressures. There's a piece there that comes back to the financial pressure and profits, which is leading in part to some of the issues we face today. We find with our economic system that's so focused on growth and profitability, rising inequality, which again exacerbates and stresses many social, economic, environmental issues. And so we find, we hit this issue of capitalism, and very naturally there's a tension between a system that wants to grow its economy, that wants to grow, how much we produce and consume, how much money we make, which comes in tension with the sort of impact we have on the environment and people. When our planet is finite, we can't, simply unsustainable, as you all know. And naturally there's a tension between worker rights and labor rights, between people's well-being and the sort of focus on money and growth. And if we go a level deeper and we keep asking, so why are we so focused on economic growth, and where has this thinking originated from? Where has this ideal fixation come from? One of the stories we begin to identify about ourselves and about the system is the story of separation. There's a great thinker whose work we respect a lot at Emerge, Charles Eisenstein, who talks a lot about this idea, the story of separateness. And it goes something like, I'm a separate person, separate from you, separate from the environment, separate from society. We're all these individual beings and things that exist in this universe that's separate from us. And because we're separate from each other, we're all in it to get the most for us. Many philosophers over the last sort of 500 years, largely from Europe, from René Descartes, who first started popularizing the idea that nature's the separate thing that we control for humans' interests. Thomas Hobbes, Calvin, John Stuart Mill, Adam Smith, a lot of these philosophers have propagated this idea that humans are rational, self-interested, in it for their own. More for you is less for me. It's a zero-sum game. And if we compete and try and get as much as we can, the invisible hand of the market will make things better and everyone will be better off. And in some ways, this thinking has actually served us enormously. It's had an important role to play, and it's meant technology has flourished. It's meant, we have created more wealth. People have been lifted out of poverty. We are more connected, more globalized. And there's been some really beautiful benefits of that thinking. By kind of breaking things up into separate parts, we can understand them more simply, and it's been really useful in advancing science. But at the same time, this focus on separation has meant we're deeply disconnected from ourselves, from each other, from Papatuanuku, from the universe at large. And that separateness has come and brought with it this idea of scarcity, this idea of fear, this idea of there's not enough out there. We're each in it for ourselves. All those notions are very much built into the design of capitalism. We have businesses that compete to get, to win customers and to grow. And this very notion of competition is a very, is in the DNA of the system we live in. And it's interesting when we're in the social entrepreneurship sector, because on one hand, we're the guys that are changing this. We bring an amazing good intention and spirit to address some of these issues. But I think the reality is a lot of these beliefs and stories about separation, about, about fear, about control, about scarcity, all the things that come with it, competition, are very present in the social entrepreneurship kind of space as well. And if you go a level deeper, I think one of the core sort of beliefs that we really hold at Emerge is the world outside us is just a reflection of ourselves. It's humans that hold certain beliefs and then create a world that reflects those beliefs. So if this sort of belief of separation, which we'll go into in a moment, is present in social entrepreneurship, it's because it's present in you and I and in our daily experience. And that's what's showing up in our teams, in our organization, in the sector at large. just to give a couple of examples to bring this to life, and if you've got your own thoughts or examples, do share them in the chat, and we'd love to break and hear them as well. You know, one example, so one kind of product of separation is because I feel separate from you and separate from everyone else, and I feel the sense of you know, I've got to get more for me, which means less for you. We naturally start competing, and we notice this in so many of our organizations, despite the fact that we share a common vision to some extent of an equitable world, where many organizations competing for the same pools of funding, the same attention, the same donors, and rather than maximizing our impact, we've ended up with a system where there's the highest charities per capita in the world in New Zealand, you know, 27,000 charities all competing, and in many cases we don't need more organizations, we need organizations that are going to create more impact. We find this notion that some of you will be familiar with, heropreneurship. The social entrepreneur gets so glorified nowadays, and often we start social entrepreneurship and ventures and impact in order to, at an unconscious level, you know, feel a sense of you know, boost our egos in some ways, be seen or be heard by society, to find our place. It's become the new way to succeed. And so therefore we start something, and anything that threatens, you know, that if anything might affect that from ending or from not existing, in some sense it's threatening ourselves. So it means as organizations, we're so attached to our ideas, we're not willing to let things go where they need to. We're not willing to end our organizations or end our initiatives if they need to. There's such a protection. And I'm sure many of you would have had the experience working in an organization where we just chase funding. You know, I've been in an organization where I've questioned, you know, is this really having the impact we want to have? Is this theory of change really working? But what we want to have as impact versus what the funders want to fund seem to be so at odds, and therefore we're not able to really commit to our impact. Again, it's this fear of we need to survive and follow the funders, and therefore you end up in this sort of circle or the cycle where you're not, you know, you're still in this place of separateness, of disconnection, of scarcity, of fear. Many of us, I'm sure, hopefully we haven't actually, but I certainly had the experience of experiencing burnout in social enterprise. I worked in a consulting job where we worked 60, 80-hour weeks. When I moved to work for a social enterprise, we worked more than that. And our sense of worth and our sense of self came from our work, and we burned ourselves so much in trying to achieve this impact, you know, and I look back, and so much of what drove us was this guilt of privilege, of this guilt of I'm not enough and therefore I need to somehow have impact to kind of fill that void. And it's just really opened up the need for us as innovators to do that deep healing work and to really address some of the deeper intentions that are driving us if we're really to be resilient and resourced and collaborative and systemic in the way we want to shift the system. I've chatted a bunch. I'd love to hand it over to you, Tui. Having worked in so many different sectors, like, what have been your observations of how these sorts of experiences of separation show up in the system?
Yeah, thanks, Shruthi. Yeah, as Shruthi said, I've so seen how what shows up in me as an individual, how that's in our team or our organisation, and how it's in the system as a whole, and how we operate, and how so often our focus is, I've been really in my head, and everything's been about numbers and about figuring it out and strategy, and really rational, and have disconnected from my body, from intuition, from feeling and listening to the life force of what wants to flow through and what actually wants to be created. And I've seen how that happens in organizations, how we can become really stuck on this thing, and we're trying to figure it out so hard. But the most successful, or most impactful things in my life have always come. They've just flowed and they've just shown up. Emerge was one of those things, and us coming together as a team. It just showed up, and I see how as a system we do that as well, and how also a big experience of mine working in environmental organisations is how, again, it can be so. I felt so how I want to sort of save the environment. You know, I care so much and I want to save it, and And that's meant that I've ended up sitting here at the computer working so hard at saving the environment, and I'm so disconnected from the environment. And it's really interesting how we do that. We can be really disconnected from the thing that we're working so hard at, and that we care about so much. And we're, again, not listening to the life force of what wants to be created, and to Papatūānuku, who has all the wisdom. And similarly, in all of that, as Shruthi said, competition in different social enterprises and non-profits that I've been in, and in different funders as well, having worked in philanthropy. It's so about getting funded and our organisation being successful, and we can really easily lose sight, or I've experienced that in these organisations, really easily losing sight of again why I'm even working in this space. And it all being about impact, about numbers, and therefore getting more funding, and disconnecting from actually what's the long-term systemic impact, and again, should this organisation exist, and what should we be doing, because we might be doing this thing but for totally the wrong reasons. So yeah, I just echo that the seeing of how things are inside me, and how it shows up in me and in my work, when I'm coming from this place of separateness or scarcity or fear, and how that shows up systemically.
Yeah, one of the examples we were reflecting on recently is just even the whole funding landscape. I think you find this with most kind of philanthropic sectors, at least in the West, where you have to, give very clear outcomes of what we're going to achieve in 6 months. And that kind of builds confidence somehow in the funder. So they fund you, and then only if you hit that, you get more funding to then continue doing what you're doing. Whereas the reality is, with the very complex problems we're working on, you don't know the solutions, and they're emergent, and the problems are changing. And what I think might work now is probably not going to work in 6 months. And this approach also assumes that I have the answer, that I know how to fix it. Whereas I think all of this again reflects this sort of separation. Humans are superior to nature, separate. Our rational minds have all the answers, as opposed to the wisdom from the heart and from the earth, which Tui was speaking to. And what if funders, instead, sort of jumping ahead, could fund teams over 6, 12 months, 3 years, 5 years, and commit to a process, being much more process focused than outcome focused. Again, in some sense, our current focus on funding just reflects the same sort of reductionist thinking of, let's figure out this will achieve this and this will achieve this, whereas all of this is so complex, and that works for simple challenges, but not often the complex social challenges that we're working on. So I wanted to share just a couple of quotes of just a few different people who's I think sum up a lot of this very simply and quite powerfully. One of our colleagues at Emerge, Louise Mara, she sums it up as too much social environmental innovation is still trying to fix the problem from an egoic paradigm, one of separation. Einstein's, we would have heard this, of course, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking that we used to create them. And really what we're advocating for, I suppose, is for us to shift our deeper inner space that we're operating from. This is another quote that I love. The success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. It was popularized by Otto Scharmer. He's an amazing sort of academic from MIT who started this movement, or this process called Theory U, which is a social change process, much more grounded in self-awareness, similar to sort of the Emerge process we're speaking to. And this came from a research he did with hundreds of CEOs and exploring sort of change efforts. And they found that so much emphasis used to be given on what you did or how you did, but actually a deeper leverage point is looking at what's the place that you as an innovator or an intervener are coming from. And is it one of wholeness and connection and abundance, or is it one of scarcity and fear and separation? Because if it is, that's what's going to be perpetuated in your solution. And I think the shift that we really feel that we need to go through individually and collectively, this decolonizing or dismantling, is one from separation to interconnectedness, one from scarcity to abundance, one from this insecurity and fear of what if I lose my job, what if I don't make it, to one of real security and peace, one of just using our heads to think, to really being in a space of thinking and feeling, using the head and the heart. One of competing, proactive scarcity, to really collaborating, really sharing power, not a funder dictating what someone does, but really meeting and co-designing in a meaningful way. being so focused on the individual to be much more focused on the whole. What's good for you is good for me. When you suffer, I suffer, as opposed to a zero-sum sort of game. But our intention coming from a place of love rather than a place of fear. You know, this is an easy one that we can do day to day when we're working. You know, where am I coming from? And there are so many moments daily where I'll catch, oh, there's a bit of fear, a bit of an insecurity that's driving this. And fear is useful because it alerts us to danger and things to be concerned of. But fear, we don't want to be the driving thing that's driving our decisions, or we'll be very limited in the kind of decisions we can make. And this other idea of, when we're in the separate mode, we kind of think our views are superior. And so we push our views and we think we have the answers, versus really being a vessel, you know, being guided by life force. We call it prana in my Indian culture. The word Māori you hear as well, you know, being a vessel for the work to happen through me, so I can be much more unattached from my ideas or my solutions and really continue to serve the system and the beneficiaries and the people we wish to serve in the way that they best need to be, rather than kind of continuously being so held on to my idea or my sort of solution. So I'm going to pause there and hand it over to you, Tui. Do you want to share a couple of examples of how you've seen the sort of interconnected way, which I think, just one last point before I hand it off, is this sort of interconnected way of being is so prevalent and so present in Te Ao Māori and in many of our Eastern cultures, you know, like my sense of self comes in connection with the land, with the sky. You know, I see myself as an ancestor of Ranganui and Papatuanuku. You know, we're deeply connected to one another as people. Your well-being affects my well-being. And so this view of interconnectedness, my sense of self comes from the relationships I'm part of, you know, not from my title or from power or from some role, but just by being in relationship with the land and with family and with ancestors, with self, you know, with a spirit or a source within us. That gives us a real grounding, which is a notion, you know, we find very prevalent in a lot of Eastern cultures. And so I think part of this process is coming back into connectedness, but also really acknowledging the deep wisdom in the East and the indigenous traditions that's been really kind of lost in this very Western head first, which has its place and is useful, but taken out of context and overemphasized can be very dangerous. So anyway, Tui, would love to hear your thoughts on examples of how this comes to life.
Yeah, thanks again, Shruthi. Yeah, again, to taku what you've said about Indigenous cultures and how there's so much, yeah, there is so much wisdom, and a lot of our Western paradigm has taken over, and we've lost that. And a big thing that I've seen that's been so powerful is when in organisations, or us as an individual in an organisation, when we invest in ourselves and in our own growth and our own awareness of ourselves, and in that we become much stronger, much more resilient individuals and teams, and we can show up better. Again, we're not burnt out, and so we're making really effective decisions, and in a team we are as well. And so when we hit things like COVID, if we have this really strong team culture, the resilience of us is so powerful. And again, systemically, how we operate, how different organisations operate together and collaborate in partnership is such a different way, and is so powerful in really creating the change. When we talk about really wanting to shift the paradigm and shift humanity's way of being, and so again, for funders, investing in funding for individuals in organisations and for those organisations to work on themselves, and it's been proven that the impact is some really large, very profitable organisations who are as a result of they're finding how can we be most effective, and they found that the way that they could be most effective was to work on their growth and the development of their people and their organisations, because as a result of that, they're so much stronger, and that's how they came to their profitability. Not, again, profitability being a Western sort of thing, but tying it all together. And similarly, being able to be connected, continue to come back to the connection of what we're doing here and what we're passionate about now, and where our life force is flowing, to be able to be not attached to our ideas, but to be listening to the life force and our purpose. And sometimes projects are needing to die in order to move into new directions. But if we're so attached to the idea and the outcomes and the numbers, we can't listen to that flow and allow these unexpected, incredible ideas to come forth. And so just tying back again to, for the system to really shift, we need to shift ourselves. And that quote that Shruthi, or all those quotes that Shruthi pulled out, but social enterprise is phenomenal in the social entrepreneurship movement. I guess what we've really found and what we're really passionate about is that not only do we look at doing business for good, but we shift our whole way of being, because otherwise we're just going to continue to create another world, the same sort of world, but with a green label. So how do we really shift our way of being? And that is really challenging because the systems, the structures are holding us in this place. And I just want to acknowledge as well, Helene and Coco, is that how I pronounce your name? Yeah, awesome. When you talk about the social enterprise industry, and I think Helene answered that really well, that again, like we're talking about, we're still in the structure of this world, and so competition is everywhere and is still what we're living in. And I'd say, Helene, to your question as well around social media, I think there's a big topic, and I know there's new documentaries that are coming out on that at the moment, and I would say, yeah, that really feels like it to me. It looks like connectedness, but there's a lot of separation underneath that, and we see that from all of our different elections and the political polarities, and yeah. Shruthi, is there anything else you'd like to add? And otherwise we'll move into breakout.
Yeah, just one last quote, and this is from Premal Shah. He's an awesome social entrepreneur. He founded Kiva, who you may be familiar with. And basically there, I'm just going to pull it up again. Or maybe I'll just copy this into the slides are playing up a bit. He's an awesome social entrepreneur, founded Kiva, the micro loan company over in the US. And he says, many of us serve from a spirit of sacrifice or specialness, but just imagine what serving from a place of wholeness feels like. When I feel full and connected, I shift into appreciation. It's a totally different source of motivation. And there's a number of social entrepreneurs, innovators, probably, everywhere that I think are really aspiring to lead in this way. And I think the last point is I don't think it's simply a journey from separateness to interconnectedness, but that's a moment-to-moment experience we can have. There are many moments where we feel this sense of connectedness, of wholeness, of abundance, of, I can be relaxed and everything's, there are moments in our work for various reasons, interactions that kind of put us into this place of disconnection, fear, insecurity. And so it's, I guess one last thought before we go into our breakouts is we really view it not as sort of moving from one to the other. It's not this sort of, but it's a moment-to-moment experience of how can I tap in to this place of connectedness. And when I notice things come up that create sort of this fear or insecurity, how can I address them and heal them and work through them such that more energy can be cleared and more of my creation can come from this very whole space, this different motivation that Premal Shah speaks of. Over to you, Tui.
Beautiful, thanks, Shruthi. And Cherish, thanks for putting that in. Totally, we really connect to Te Ao Māori and that viewpoint of what kind of ancestor do you want to be, and be, because that way of being of we're all connected and our past is with us. So yeah, really resonate. Just because of time, we'll get you into your breakout rooms now. So we'll be in there for about 5 minutes, and just if you go around and share, I'm just entering into the chat a question now. So just sharing, when do you feel a sense of connectedness or wholeness? When have you felt connected to your essential whole self? When have you felt a feeling of abundance and connectedness to all life? What are your places, people, situations, practices that bring you here? Yeah, so we'll be in there for 5 minutes, and just to go around the group and share.
And just as an example, it could be as simple as, like, it could be I enjoyed a nice meal with my family, and I felt connected in the garden with my hands in the soil, taking a moment to take a few deep breaths and do my meditation. It could be all sorts of things. So yeah, let your mind go wild. We'll pass it to you, Tan.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. What will happen is that you'll receive a message 4 minutes in, 4 minutes into the 5 minutes that the session will be ending. Just stay on it, and what it will do is we'll take you back to the main room after that a minute notice. So I'm just going to put you into the rooms now, and you'll have 5 minutes. See you back here. Bye.
Thanks, Dan.
Just accept it. Yeah. Welcome back, everyone. I thought I'd just give it an extra minute, because just topping into the rooms seems like there's good discussion. So I'll pass back to our co-facilitators.
Thanks,
Tan. Yeah, there was such beautiful conversation. I'm conscious of time, and we wanted to do one more breakout. So maybe we can hear maybe one person from each room if you want to share back an insight or a gem that came up, and then we could jump into the second breakout and wrap up shortly after that. We could start with our Bruce or Liv or Coco. Would either of you like to share? Bruce, your last point. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, we started, when we talk about connectedness, we tend to talk about connectiveness with me and other people, but actually connectiveness with myself, and also connectiveness with our environment, and also, well, I don't like sounding religious, but spiritual connectedness. Yeah. So all four are in good balance, and then we feel healthy. So yeah, that was a kind of our conversation. Is that okay, Bruce? Yeah, okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Coco. Would someone like to share, from the other room?
Oh, if you don't mind, I'll just maybe summarize the 3 ideas we touched on, because I thought that was really interesting that we all had a different take on connectiveness, because, one of us talked about, how you feel connected to and with nature when you're in this very intense kind of, beautiful situation of being part of it and being vulnerable to the elements. And someone else shared about, more from a family point of view and the sense of like, giving life to human beings and growing them and nurturing them and seeing them growing as wonderful individuals, in that kind of sense of satisfaction and maybe legacy. And then someone else talked about how it could feel from the inside in terms of, a situation where one may feel empowered or may have the chance to empower others. And that's much more like inside, like looking personal feeling of feeling connected. So I thought that was kind of a nice range of thoughts.
Lovely. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing. And if there's more thoughts, please drop them in the chat, and we'll pass to you too if you want to introduce the second question.
Awesome. Thanks, Shruthi. Thank you.
Cool. Just before you start the question, are you wanting just to keep the same participants in the breakout rooms?
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So similar. So our question this time is, what fears, insecurities, or patterns do you notice that prevent you or your organisation to stay in a place of connectedness or wholeness?
Do you want to give an example to it?
Yeah, totally. So I'll just put that in the chat. Cool. So it could be a real fear of being able to, sorry, we've just got someone entering the meeting room. A fear of if I speak my truth, I'm going to be shut down, and I'm not going to be heard. And yeah, do you have another example, Shruthi?
One for me that I experienced for many years was just, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, like the guilt of having so much privilege and therefore feeling like I had to do so much to somehow be deserving of the privilege, and how that led to really unhealthy patterns of work, and therefore needed to be processed and released. And with time, that guilt turned into anger, and then sadness, and then compassion, which was a much more whole place to operate from. So that's one that I personally have experienced in the past. Occasionally still shows up. But yeah, maybe we'll go into our rooms time. If
I'll just add to that, Shruthi, beforehand, sorry. And then if you want to also add, if there's any ideas you have on what could support you to shift this, I've been. Yeah.
Hey, we'll just go and I'll just start the breakout rooms now, and I'll keep to the 5 minutes this time around, so you'll get a notification in 4 minutes in.
Thanks, Dan.
See you back here. Welcome back, everyone.
I'm really conscious of time. Liv's just had to leave us, so we'll try and wrap up maybe by 2:05, if that's okay with everyone. And then the space will be open if we want to stay around and keep debriefing and sharing as well. Maybe we can hear back from maybe one person of what your thoughts do in the interest of time, and then kind of go into closing comments. Would anyone like to share anything? Yeah, from their discussion back with the group.
That imposter syndrome from ourselves, that, you know, are we good enough? Do we really have it in us? Can we really add value? And the constant question of self, which can then be imposed on others through our own nervousness of adding value, and needing to be confident and authentic, because then your confidence and authenticity and being able to admit that you might have got something wrong will add value to everybody else in their way of being, to be able to connect back with you, which actually ties in with Helene's discussion, which was around people in an organisation who come in purely for self-ego. And that's the flip side of the of the imposter syndrome. It's the flip side of some people in organisations come in with such an inflated kind of narcissistic sort of attitude or an aura around them that they're not open enough to realise what the value of the organisation is, or what the driving force is, and they don't allow any connectivity with anyone else because they're so driven by self. That's what we were talking about.
Well, that's so well summarised. You took such great concepts and distilled it so clearly. Thank you, Nez. Yeah, thanks for that, Shirish, as well. So we're coming almost to the end, and I guess a couple of sort of closing comments to bring this all together that we wanted to share. Sort of, I suppose, the theory of change, or the belief we have, it emerges. We need to really innovate or be in the space or the state of connectedness, of wholeness, of abundance, if we are to really create a new world. And if we're still innovating from separateness, fear, insecurity, and all of that, we're just going to perpetuate the sorts of systems and structures and problems that we see in society. And so as social innovators, entrepreneurs, investors, change makers, you know, in whatever way we're doing that, entrepreneurs, it's so critical that we invest in ourselves and find ways to plug into that wholeness. We all know how to do it. We all shared ways, be it we really advocate, you know, at least 10 minutes of a mindfulness practice, at least a little bit of time in nature daily, find a tree and connect with it regularly, something in your own area, some sort of journaling or digestion practice, you know, a few sort of self-awareness practices is really core, I think, for everyone, particularly innovators. As teams, how might you bring in some of these practices? You know, start your meeting with a quick mindfulness. We started the session with the mindfulness just to check in, and if you can do a little process and realize, actually, I'm feeling really disconnected and stressed and nervous. Oh, let's actually acknowledge that and honor that and give you the support you need, rather than just continue with the meeting when I'm clearly not present and in a state to really collaborate and contribute. So how might we, as teams, find practices and ways to connect and step into that wholeness? And also when things come up that prevent us, be it imposter, be it guilt, be it I'm scared I'm not going to be heard, as Tui said, how can we get support and really address that. And there's so many methods that we can do individually, you know, be it on our own, be it through you know, mindfulness practices, be it through faith practices, be it through coaching therapy, be it through just nature itself is so healing. Like, we as social entrepreneurs, innovators, need to be aware of this internal dismantling and recreating. And if we can do that personally and step more and more into wholeness, so much energy is created to really, you know, create a new world at a very deep level. So much of our work at Emerge is helping change makers identify what needs to be healed and plug back into that essential wholeness, and innovate or create from that place, which feels so present and so natural to many of our Eastern and our Māori ways of being. Lots to learn from there. So, and it's something that you already know how to do and you've probably already done. So it's not something new. I think it's more the session, the intention was to bring more awareness that you know how to plug into that wholeness, and you know what holds you back, and how might you continue to innovate from that place that you know all too well, but often is really lacking from our organisations. Tui, other comments from your side?
Yeah, no, just to talk about what you've said, Shruth, and it's been awesome being with you all today, and really aware of that an hour is a really short period, and so we would love to share more, and yeah, we've got a blog and things, and so we'd love to share more information. Please get in touch if you want to know any more. But yeah, it's been wonderful being with you all today, and yeah, would love to hear from you all in the chat box. Just any takeaways, how you're leaving today, before we close. Yeah.
Tui and Shruthi, could you please just, if you leave your email or contact address that you're happy to do, and I'll leave the session open so that people capture that, and then I connect with you after this. I really appreciate your time, being very generous with your with your sharing of new perspectives, and really lovely to do the exercise. I felt much better after that. Just to other participants, thanks very much for your attendance. Please just look at the rest of the program. I'll just put it through the chat on the Impact Initiative website, and hopefully we'll see you there at the other sessions. Thanks very much. I'll just leave this open. If people want to connect, it'll be open until probably about 2:25. If people want to just use the space. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.